what I want to do in these videos, this one and one more, is just go over the terms I need you to know for test 1. And you know, you should have a homonyms list, homophones list, and a problematic word construction list. There's 7 of them. I just talking about this sheet of paper that should be in. You should have a copy of this or know where to find it. And I expect you to know the first 13 homophones for this test, and any of the word constructions, the ones that start with, you know, in this article it says, or the 2 choices, the best is the second, or this one is different than that word. Any one of those 7 are, anyone is open to be tested upon in the test. So you should know these, the first 13 homophones, all the way up to break and break. So accept, adherence, admittance, advice, adolescence, effect, aid, aisle, illusion, alter, bear, board, break. Those can be on the test. All right. Now here are the terms, and I'm not gonna, you know, draw something out for you, simply because you know, I want you to listen actively, and when I tell you the term, I want you to note it and take notes on it or think about it. You may have already gotten all of this in class, and if you've been paying attention in class and coming to class, then there's nothing new here. This could be then for you review, or if you for some reason you've been missing class, this could help you get caught up. But you know, it's just going to be a quick overview. Really, I've covered them in full in class. So the first thing that we've done is the level 1 critique. Now the level 1 critique is also just known as a critique or a review paper. All right, and it has 2 parts to it: the summary of whatever it is you're critiquing and the evaluation. Okay, so you have summary and evaluation. The level 1 critique, I call it a level 1 critique because that, you know, that's when you have an object you're critiquing and all you provide is a summary and an evaluation. You usually are dealing with a particular type of artifact known as a literal artifact. So I've already given you 4 terms: level 1 critique, summary, evaluation, literal artifact. That's how I'm going to work these things. So a literal artifact is any man-made object or thing. So it could be a document, it could be a movie, it could be a building, just anything that's not found in nature in its natural state. We'll go back to the root of the word artifact, where we get artifice, artificial, and we get the word artisan in the sense of art, an artist. So anything that has been made by man to fulfill a function, we can call generally an artifact. Okay, a literal artifact is just some object or some text that has a job to do, and it is designed to do that job. And as far as it does the job, to that extent, it succeeds or fails in its reason for being. All right. So think of, for example, Farewell My Mailbox, or Being Green at Ben and Jerry's, or some People Lie for a Reason, or The Divinity of the iPhone, or something we may have read in class. Now I just threw out 4 articles I've been reading with my students in different classes, but one of those you may have read with me in class. You know, did the author have a purpose for writing that text? Yes. He or she may have just literally laid it out for you and say, here's my reasons, here's my thesis, here's why I believe this is my case. If you can understand English and you have a logical mind working and you can see how I'm putting together the data and my definitions and I'm making my case, at the end you should be able to say that's a possible way of looking at it, and maybe it's even a probable way. And I hope that you become convinced of my thesis. That is just a certain type of literal artifact. Okay, literal artifact. There's no hidden levels of meaning. It's just all the meaning that you need to get from it, and the author wants you to get from it, is right on the literal surface, the surface of the letters. But also think of let's say think of this packet of notepads. Now, if you know me, you know that you know that I really use a lot of these. These are my way, right? My way of keeping organized. Little sticky notes, okay? Does it have a job to do? Yes. Is it designed to do that? Well, it's small, portable. It's a low tack glue so that you can put it somewhere and then remove it. So it's very low tack. That's what you literally call it. And it is a nice, different color than white, so that it stands out against the white. So like, why is it yellow? You know, well, it has a job to do. These are things you put on papers or places, and usually if it's a piece of paper, the paper is going to be white. White on white doesn't stand out too much, but you can't have like black on white or dark blue on white, because the ink you use may not be visible. So it's, you know, yellow, some pastel color, right? And maybe if you have different colors, then you can use different, you know, maybe the blue ones signify, the light blue ones, the pastel blue or whatever, signify this type of memo that you write to yourself, and the pink ones are this other type of memo, and you can use it to categorize stuff, and it's very functional, see? So as far as like, hey, what's the style of the sticky note, you know, or what's the hidden meanings, or what's the aesthetic? That's a term I'll talk about again. Okay, 2 for 2 there. Let me pick this up again. Well, you know, I don't even know if there is one. It has a certain size because the makers realize, you know, people desire these in certain sizes. But I'll tell you one size you never see a Post-it on, 8.5 by 11. You never see a Post-it the size of a piece of paper. It's always going to be smaller, but then you have some larger ones and some smaller ones and some smaller still. You've seen, because it's all functional. You know, people realize they might need a different size for a different job. Okay, so there's not much aesthetic in this at all. But let me show you this. Okay, this is a turtle, and it's a pencil holder and a pen holder. I really like it. So what's its job? Its job is to hold, you could use it as a paperweight to hold paper down, and it also has holes up here to hold writing instruments. Does it do its job? Yes. Does it have elements in it that go beyond just doing this job? Absolutely. I mean, why is it a turtle and not just like a, you know, this also can be a pencil holder. So just a jar. So why this? You know? Well, at one point, the people making this wanted to make also not only a tool, but a work of art. Okay? And the art was to carry as a collection of symbols or form. It was to convey attitude, style, desire, some sort of suasive element. Now, a suasive element is something that appeals to you in an intangible way, and it's working its magic on you, and you don't know why you're being attracted to it necessarily, but you realize there are elements here of attraction. That you can remove these elements and still fulfill the function of having a pencil holder. So just think of a, you know, just like a steel ball with holes in it and a flat bottom, and you just put there and put the pencils in the hole. Would it hold the pencils? Sure. Would it be as nice in my mind as this turtle? Probably not. I like this turtle. So this would be the literal artifact, okay, as would the sticky notes. This would be an aesthetic artifact because, yes, it's doing a job too, but it also has a lot of qualities that are not essential to the job itself, but deemed necessary and important to the overall development of this object as an object of desire for whoever buys it or whoever likes it. So we call that the aesthetic, okay? And the aesthetic, sometimes, well, you know, so we're going to sit here and say, well, what's the meaning of this turtle holder? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I just know that I like it, right? But I like it not for the fact that it holds pencils, but because it holds pencils and it's a turtle that's black and it feels great. It has a particular feel to it, and it has a nice weight to it. Over the years, I've come to really like it. Okay, so I'm not going to say that this has layers of meaning, but see, it has stuff that moves it beyond just the function of fulfilling a job. So this does have aesthetic on it. Um, but you know that a lot of aesthetic qualities do in fact carry meaning. So think of Maori, the Maori face painting, the warriors of New Zealand. Think of the totem poles that they may have. And you look at this pole and it's aesthetic. Does it have extra layers of meaning on it? Absolutely. Okay. I talked to you about the Blue Shirt Airport in Milwaukee. Okay. So Milwaukee had a glorious past, is struggling with its future, hoping for a future full of redemption. Okay. Because it's a city on the edge. It was a city on the edge. It has a couple things going for it. It has 2 major colleges and universities located in its center, but you know, it was losing the population. You know, you need a young, thriving population. So it was once built around, you know, export of and import, but mainly export of America's resources. It's a port city. It's a lot of docks, a lot of wharfs, a lot of ports. You know, and they have ships taking stuff out from the heartland, out to through the Great Lakes, you know, into other regions of the United States or Canada or into Europe. So the times have changed, and you know what you have in Milwaukee now, and this is 2013, but in 2008, 2009, this was just all over. You have a ton of abandoned factory buildings that people are sitting around saying, what are we going to do with these buildings? Because they're obviously not being used now for what they were once used for. So they're trying to redesign the city. They're trying to repackage it, so to speak, and they're turning these buildings into really neat things. One neat thing is an indoor farm. They have an indoor farm going down there. I'd love to see it, but an indoor garden, a huge indoor garden facility. But anyway, their airport, okay? They went to the airport, and what they started doing is paying a lot of money to famous artists to come and redesign buildings. So they had their Milwaukee Art Museum. Now you should Google that. That's a Calatrava design. It's a very beautiful building. It's a famous building, the Milwaukee Art Museum. But they also wanted to try to get their airport redesigned. Okay, so they had a parking garage. If you've already heard the story because you've been in class, just fast forward the video. But if you haven't, here's a good illustration of this. Okay, so they wanted to pay a famous artist. I don't even remember his name. I should have my details more in line when I come up with this stuff. But anyway, a lot of money to make a parking garage. And at the very corner of the parking garage, he was going to erect a fiberglass blue shirt. Let's say it was going to be 50 feet tall. You know, this huge blue shirt thing. Just a blue shirt. And, you know, it was a serious proposal. And people were really pushing for this. It never happened. I wish it had. Because think of what it would mean. What does a blue shirt mean? Well, blue collar, right? I mean, these are people that have worked hard for their livelihood with their hands, with skill in the past for Milwaukee. The skilled engineer, factory worker, farmer, whatnot. But so you remember that heritage, right? But you turn it into an art symbol because obviously you have an artist making this and it has no actual function. They're not going to put a flag at the top to try to figure out which way the wind is blowing. So it's just there, but it's there to remind you of something. It has layers of meaning because, first of all, it's at the airport. You know, one thing that distinguishes cities that are on the out versus cities that are on the in and on the up is that they're very mobile. And they allow for international comings and goings. Intranational and international. So you need an airport. You need a really good airport. So they wanted to signify this on their airport that they're a mobile city for people. And so you have this symbol harkening back to the old days, but it's also calling forth the new because you know what the youth are attracted to now is art. And that sort of trendy, stylish way of living. So I think at least that's what Milwaukee's thinking. That would have been an aesthetic artifact. Here's another one. Washington Mutual, known as WAMU, was the largest bank in American history. Started in Seattle, went all the way to New York. It also has the dubious honor of being the largest bank ever to fail in American history. Maybe the history of the world, I don't know, but it was a huge bank, and it just went kaput, right? Completely bankrupt. JP Morgan Chase is probably the next biggest bank now, but the reason it's so big is it bought all of WAMU's, Washington Mutual's buildings and all that when WAMU went bankrupt. So, well, anyway, in its heyday, WAMU had a center of operation, Seattle. So they had this huge skyscraper, the Washington Mutual building. I don't know if that's the actual name of the skyscraper, but that's where they housed. The whole building was for them. And they had the bottom, think of this tall skyscraper and kind of divide it right in half sort of evenly. The bottom half was really heavily buttressed with stone and a lot of brown stonework down at the bottom, okay? But the top half was really made of a lot of glass tilted at a slight angle so that it would reflect the sky. Okay, so it's just tilted a few degrees so the panes of the windows would actually capture the blue of the sky. So when you were driving into Seattle or driving out, you would see this building that was proportioned like a human standing up, okay? Those were the proportions. And the bottom half is sort of brown, tannish brown, the top half is sort of a sky blue. Well, guess what? Their tellers at the banks, their official uniform was some sort of brown on the bottom half, blue on the top, brown pants, brown skirt, whatever, blue blouse, blue shirt. And when you saw that building, you were supposed to somehow sense the presence of a bank teller standing guard over the city, standing tall over the city. So there is levels of meaning to that. Now, did that building have an actual physical, literal function? Yes, it was the house, people, office space, computers. It was wired. You know, it just had the basic stuff a building had. And why do you want buildings? To protect yourself from the elements, to give you a secure place to collect your assets, physical assets. I mean, all sorts of things like that, right? A working space that's not your home. So it was fulfilling all those functions. Can you imagine completely redesigning the building? How about painting it black? How about taking off that glass and just putting regular windows up and things like that? Would it still serve the function it did? Sure. Would it still hold the office space? Sure. Would the wires still carry the same data? Sure. You know, would the plumbing still work the same? Sure. So, you know, anything you can change and not actually affect the function that the thing is doing, that stuff you can change is part of the aesthetic. Then it's kind of part of the design, part of the style, and it's meant to evoke in you an attitude, a position, a belief, a desire, or perhaps even literal meanings, or layers of meaning. So an aesthetic artifact has those different levels of meaning to it, and when you go and you try to probe those different levels, you are actually coming up with an interpretation of why it's positioned that way and what does it mean. So a literal artifact does not have any need to be interpreted. What you see is what you get. It's plainly there. An aesthetic artifact does have need for interpretation. So when you write a critique or a review, those two things are the same. A critique essay, a review essay. You have to ask yourself, what am I critiquing? Is it a literal artifact or an aesthetic artifact? Because if it's an aesthetic artifact, I'm going to have at least 3 parts to my critique. The summary, the evaluation, which is everything you had for that first type of critique, but an added middle part, the interpretation. Okay, now, so you are realizing that for this artifact, whether it's a short story or a building, has 2 ways it can be summarized. It can be summarized on the literal level. Okay, so this is what The Fly was about. 2 men visiting in an office. Both have lost sons in a war. One talks to the other about visiting his son's grave in Belgium. The other closes down and becomes catatonic, struggles with the grief. The visitor leaves. The boss stays behind and contemplates or tries to contemplate his son's death, expects to grieve and to be done with it, but cannot cry. Ends up being distracted by a fly that has fallen in his ink pot. You see how I'm just giving you the literal chain of events. So that's the summary of the literal level, the level of the letters on the page. But you also would have then a summary of the aesthetic qualities of it, and you would then be asking, well, or the figurative qualities, what makes the story work? How is it impacting me? Why is it creating these values and these elements in me? Like attitudes and desires. Now, I'm using desires here in a broad sense, but and what are the underlying meanings of this, okay? And then you would interpret it on that level. You would actually be, if you summarize it on that level, you would be providing an interpretation. It's the interpretation of the summary of the aesthetic elements, a summary of the figurative meaning of the artifact. And so I'm not going to call it summary because I don't want to confuse terms. I'll say summary. Let's just reserve that term to the literal level. Let's call the summary of the figurative level the interpretation. So we got summary, interpretation, and then you have evaluation, okay? That would be the level 2 critique, the 3 parts to the level 2 critique. Now I'm also calling the level 2 critique an aesthetic analysis. I'm also calling it a literary review or a literary response paper, because you're going to hear it referred to that as often in literature class, because literature is full of this sort of thing, the aesthetic. But I don't want you to forget that the same thing you're doing in literature class when you try to interpret a short story would be the same thing you're doing in an architecture class or a fashion class or a business economics class when you're trying to interpret certain trends or certain building styles or certain clothing movements. Okay, it would be an aesthetic analysis. So an aesthetic analysis has those 3 parts: summary, interpretation, evaluation. Now in the summary and interpretation part sections, that needs to be dedicated to accurately and objectively just trying to represent what the author or the maker or the creator of this thing was trying to do. So if this is still the they said space, for example, if you're writing a short story and it's written by Henry Manns or something, you might say Manns points out this, Manns is saying this, Manns' short story has these elements in it, Manns is really trying to suggest this as his deeper meaning. It's all the Henry Manns says space. So that's his voice. That's where you would allocate his voice. In your evaluation, you would then come in with, I believe, I understand it to be this. I see here that he's pointing there, but I might not agree, or I think it could be re-extended or reapplied or challenged or redefined. This is my space, the I say space, okay? So what we're talking about now is voice. The voice is, okay, claims are being made. Whose claims are? The authors of the creator of the object you're critiquing, or is it your voice, your opinion, your claims, and you're putting them forth by virtue of the prerogative of the evaluator. You do have that right. You're writing the review. So in your evaluation, it's the my voice section. So voice would be the claims that are made, their connection to the authors that are making them. It's his voice, it's my voice, it's her voice, that sort of thing. I'm going to stop this video because it's gone for 22 minutes, and I'm going to create another one to keep on going with these terms, and I might actually have to create a third one, but these are important terms you need to know, all of them for the test. So I'll see you in a bit.